They sold over 40 million records worldwide. Their album High Infidelity sat at #1 for 15 straight weeks. They had not one, but 2 Billboard #1 singles that defined an entire generation's heartbreak. REO Speedwagon wasn't just big, they were the sound of early 80s America. Then the cracks appeared. The guitarist who wrote their biggest rockers walked away in bitterness. Internal tensions that had simmered for years finally boiled over. The band that once filled stadiums became a nostalgia act, cycling through lineups and riding the county fair circuit. By 2024, they couldn't even agree on whether to keep the name alive. The final shows happened quietly, almost apologetically, as founding members retired and the others fought over what came next. This is the story of how success, massive, overwhelming, all-consuming success, became the very thing that destroyed the brotherhood beneath it. A tale of blue-collar kids from Illinois who climbed to the absolute peak of American rock, only to discover that staying there required sacrifices none of them were truly willing to make. But to understand the collapse, we have to go back to Champaign, Illinois, 1967. Champaign, Illinois in the late 60s wasn't a place where rock stars were made. It was a college town, flat, practical, Midwestern to its core. The University of Illinois campus churned out engineers and accountants, not arena headliners. But in the dorms and basement practice spaces, something was brewing. Neil Doughty was studying electrical engineering when he met drummer Alan Gratzer. They bonded over a shared obsession, making music loud enough to drown out the monotony of textbooks and term papers. Rock wasn't a dream for these guys. It was survival, an escape valve from lives that seemed predetermined and suffocating. They started jamming with other students, cycling through singers and guitarists, searching for a sound that felt like theirs. The early lineup was scrappy, chaotic, more ambition than polish. But they had something. Doughty's swirling keyboards gave them texture, Gratzer's drumming gave them drive. And when they finally locked in the right combination of voices and guitars, they had chemistry. They needed a name that matched their grit. Someone stumbled across an old fire truck made by REOs, the REO Speedwagon, a symbol of American can-do spirit from the early 1900s. It was quirky, memorable, blue-collar. Perfect. REO Speedwagon was born. What made them different in those early days was their work ethic. While other bands waited for lucky breaks, REO toured. Relentlessly. They played every dive bar, college gym, and county fair that would have them. They built a following the hard way, one sweaty club at a time, mostly across the Midwest. Their early albums, starting with their 1971 self-titled debut, captured a raw, bluesy, guitar-heavy sound. It wasn't pop. It wasn't polished. It was working-class rock and roll, made by guys who understood that success meant outworking everyone else. By the mid-70s, they'd caught the attention of Epic Records and a young, hungry manager named Irving Azoff, who would go on to become one of the most powerful figures in the music industry. Their 1977 live album, Live, You Get What You Play For, became a cult favorite, showcasing marathon jams on tracks like 157 Riverside Avenue and Ridin' the Storm Out. They were the band's band, a touring machine respected by peers, beloved by a growing legion of hard rock fans. But even in the beginning, the seeds of destruction were already there. Kevin Cronin, who'd become their primary vocalist and songwriter, had already left once in the early 70s before returning. His relationship with the band was complicated. He was the voice, the frontman, the guy who connected with audiences, but he wasn't always the guy writing the heavy rockers that defined their early identity. That was Gary Richrath, the lead guitarist whose riffs and raw energy gave REO its edge. The spotlight was never equally shared, and even then, you could feel the tension. Whose band was this, really? The late 70s were a turning point. REO Speedwagon was successful, sure, but they weren't stars. They were a hard-touring regional act with a loyal fan base and respectable album sales. Then something shifted. The band started experimenting with a new sound, smoother, more melodic, anchored by sweeping power ballads instead of extended guitar solos. It was a gamble. Their core fans loved the bluesy jams and arena rock grit. But the market was changing. Radio wanted hooks. Radio wanted emotion. In 1978, they released You Can Tune a Piano, But You Can't Tune a Fish, an album with a ridiculous title and a serious intent. It went platinum. Songs like Roll with the Changes became sing-along anthems at their shows, proof that they could write earworms without abandoning their rock roots entirely. But beneath this triumph, a quiet shift was happening. Cronin's ballads were becoming the centerpiece. Richrath's guitar-driven rockers were still there, still beloved by longtime fans, but the singles, the songs that got radio play, the songs that brought in new listeners, those were Cronin's domain. Then came November 21, 1980, the release of High Infidelity. The album exploded. Not slowly, not regionally, exploded. Keep on Loving You, a heart-wrenching ballad Cronin had written about reconciliation, hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The album climbed to the top of the charts and refused to move. For 15 consecutive weeks, High Infidelity was the best-selling album in America. It eventually went diamond, 10 times platinum, over 10 million copies sold in the U.S. alone. REO Speedwagon, the blue-collar grinders from Champaign, Illinois, were suddenly one of the biggest bands on the planet. What fans didn't see was the pressure cooker they'd stepped into. Success on this scale doesn't just elevate you, it devours you. The touring schedule became relentless. Stadiums, arenas, back-to-back nights in different cities. The demand for new material was constant. Epic Records wanted another High Infidelity. Radio wanted more ballads. Fans wanted the hits and the deep cuts. Everyone wanted a piece of them, and there were only so many pieces to go around. In 1982, they released Good Trouble, trying to recapture the magic. It did well, gold, platinum, but it wasn't High Infidelity. How could it be? That album was lightning in a bottle, a perfect storm of timing, emotion, and craft. But the industry doesn't care about context. You're only as good as your last release, and anything less than diamond feels like failure. And that's where the trouble began. Gary Richrath, the guy who'd written Take It on the Run and countless rockers that anchored their live shows, was watching Cronin become the face of REO Speedwagon. The ballads were the hits. Cronin was doing the interviews, getting the spotlight, shaping the band's direction toward radio-friendly pop rock. Richrath's harder-edge songs were still on the albums, still in the setlists, but they weren't the story anymore. The real cost was building quietly. Resentment, ego, the unspoken question: who gets credit when a band this big succeeds? By 1984, REO Speedwagon reached their absolute apex. Wheels Are Tinnin' dropped, featuring Can't Fight This Feeling, another Cronin power ballad that climbed all the way to #1. It was their second chart topper, proof they weren't a one-album wonder. The song became ubiquitous: weddings, proms, radio countdowns, movie soundtracks. It was everywhere. Picture this: massive stages, sold-out arenas from coast to coast, millions of dollars rolling in, 2 #1 singles, a diamond-certified album, and a back catalog that radio couldn't stop playing. They'd made it. Not just made it, they'd conquered. But that moment of glory was also the beginning of the end. Because while they looked unstoppable on stage, everything off stage was cracking. Richrath felt sidelined, creatively stifled. The band that had started as a collaborative rock outfit now felt like Kevin Cronin's ballad machine with a backing band. Richrath's contributions, his guitar work, his songwriting, his identity as the band's rocker, were being overshadowed by the very thing that made them famous. The lifestyle divergence was stark, too. Some members embraced the pop star life, the attention, the excess, the fame. Others just wanted to play rock and roll without the corporate machine dictating every move. Touring non-stop meant they barely had time to write, rehearse, or even talk about where the band was headed. They were too busy being REO Speedwagon to figure out what REO Speedwagon was supposed to be. Beneath the triumph, the cracks were spreading. The breaking point came in 1989. After years of simmering tension, Gary Richrath, founding member, lead guitarist, the guy who'd written some of their most enduring rockers, walked away. It wasn't a blowout fight on stage or a tabloid scandal. It was quieter, more painful. Creative differences, they called it. A mutual parting of ways. But everyone knew what it really was. Richrath couldn't stomach being a sideman in a band he'd helped build from nothing. The balance had tipped too far toward Cronin's vision, and there was no coming back. Richrath's departure gutted the band's identity. Sure, they replaced him. Dave Amato stepped in on lead guitar, a talented player who could nail the solos and keep the shows running. Brian Hitt took over on drums around the same time. On paper, REO Speedwagon still existed. But it wasn't the same band anymore. The chemistry, the brotherhood, the shared history, that was gone. Here's the thing about losing a core member at the peak: the public doesn't care about your internal struggles. They just see the name on the marquee and assume it's the same band they fell in love with. But the soul had changed. Fans who'd been there since the You Get What You Play for days could feel it. The new lineup was professional, polished even, but it lacked the raw edge that Richrath brought. The lowest moment wasn't a single catastrophic show. It was the slow realization that they'd never be that band again. By the late 80s and early 90s, the charts had moved on. Grunge was taking over. Hair metal was dying. Power ballads felt dated, almost corny. REO Speedwagon went from headlining stadiums to playing smaller venues, state fairs, nostalgia package tours with other 80s acts. The money was still decent, nostalgia is lucrative, but the relevance was gone. They'd become a heritage act, a band people loved for what they used to be, not what they were becoming. And the fracture with Richrath never healed. He went on to release solo material, playing smaller clubs, never quite recapturing the spotlight. When he died in 2015, the tributes poured in, bandmates praising his talent, his legacy, his contributions. But the fact remained, he and REO Speedwagon had spent his final decades estranged, the wounds too deep to mend. So where did they go from there? REO Speedwagon, or at least the version with Kevin Cronin at the helm, kept touring. And touring. And touring. They released new material sporadically, Find Your Own Way Home in 2007, a Christmas album in 2009, but nobody was buying REO Speedwagon for new songs. They wanted, Keep on Loving You. They wanted, Can't Fight This Feeling. They wanted 1980, Frozen in Amber, delivered live with competence and nostalgia. The band leaned into it. They joined forces with Styx for co-headlining tours, released a live album together, Arch Allies, live at Riverport in 2000, and became fixtures on the classic rock circuit. Summer shed tours, casinos, state fairs. If there was a stage and an audience that remembered the 80s, REO was there. Bruce Hall, the bassist who joined in the late 70s and contributed vocals and songwriting, remained a steady presence. Neil Doughty, the founding keyboardist and the band's longest-tenured member, kept grinding, his swirling organ sounds still anchoring the live show. For a while, it felt like they'd found a sustainable path. Legacy act, steady income, loyal fan base, no pressure to chase hits. There were even moments that felt like healing. Occasional reunions, anniversary tours, hometown honors. The University of Illinois connection was celebrated. They were inducted into local halls of fame, their contributions to Midwestern rock immortalized. But the story wasn't over. Decades later, the battle became about legacy and survival. By the 2020s, age and health were catching up. Neil Doughty, the last founding member still touring, retired from the road in 2023. He'd given everything to REO Speedwagon, from dorm room jams in 1967 to stadium stages in the 80s to state fairs in the 2020s. His retirement was emotional but inevitable. Then came the harder questions. Without Doughty, without Richrath, without the original core, what was REO Speedwagon? Could Kevin Cronin keep touring under the name with hired guns filling the gaps? Should he? Internal disagreements around touring schedules, health issues, and the weight of carrying a legacy led to announcements in 2024, REO Speedwagon would stop touring. The name, the brand, the entity that had sold 40 million records, it was being retired. The final shows in late 2024 weren't triumphant farewell tours with ticker tape and tears. They were quiet, almost anticlimactic. A band that had once been unstoppable was simply stopping. Cronin announced plans to continue performing under his own name, playing REO classics for fans who still wanted to hear them. But it wouldn't be REO Speedwagon. That chapter was closed. Here's the sting. This wasn't a story of bankruptcy or scandal or flame-out addiction. This was a story of attrition. Time, age, unresolved tensions, and the sheer exhaustion of keeping a legacy alive when the people who built it were gone or estranged. The band that survived the 80s, survived lineup changes, survived irrelevance, couldn't survive the simple, brutal math of growing old. In 2025, there was a brief, bittersweet reunion. The surviving classic members appeared at a Champagne halftime show, honoring their roots, playing for the hometown crowd that had watched them leave as nobodies and return as legends. It was a moment of closure, a nod to where it all began. But even that couldn't erase the decades of distance between them. So where does that leave REO Speedwagon? Kevin Cronin still performs. He's still out there, playing the songs that defined a generation, keeping the music alive even if the name is retired. Some of the other members have moved on entirely, stepping away from the spotlight for good. The catalog endures. High Infidelity is still streamed millions of times. Keep on Loving You and Can't Fight This Feeling remain staples on classic rock radio, in movie soundtracks, in wedding playlists. The songs outlive the band, which is both a triumph and a tragedy. Fans across generations, original 80s devotees and younger listeners discovering them through nostalgia channels, still hold REO Speedwagon in a special place. They were the soundtrack to heartbreak, to resilience, to blue-collar ambition made good. They proved that a bunch of kids from Illinois could conquer the world, even if they couldn't hold it together forever. The legacy is complicated. Critics often mocked them for their earnest sentimentality, for leaning into power ballads when rock was supposed to be dangerous. But the people, the millions who bought the albums, who sang along at shows, who slow danced to Can't Fight This Feeling, they didn't care about critical fashion. They cared about how the songs made them feel. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Success created legends, but it also created enemies, internal ones. The harmony that looked so effortless on stage hid years of rot underneath, tensions that no amount of hit singles could smooth over. The system, the industry, the touring machine, the relentless demand for more, destroyed the brotherhood that made it all possible in the first place. There's talk, occasionally, of one more reunion, a documentary, an archival project, some final recognition of what they accomplished. Whether that happens or not, REO Speedwagon's place in American rock history is secure. A massively successful, radio-friendly band whose early 80s peak left a cultural footprint that still echoes today. They rose higher than most bands ever dream of. And the fall? It wasn't a crash. It was a slow fade, members drifting apart, time doing what fame and fortune couldn't quite manage, bringing the story to an end. So here's my question for you. What part of this story hits you the most? Was it the internal tension between Cronin and Richrath? The slow realization that nostalgia can only carry you so far? Or maybe you saw them live back in the day. Tell me about it. Drop your memories, your opinions, your favorite REO deep cut in the comments below. If you want more stories about the bands that defined an era, the triumphs, the disasters, the complicated legacies, hit that subscribe button. We've got more rise and fall episodes coming, and trust me, some of these stories get even wilder. Thanks for watching. Keep on loving the music.